Welcome to Truth to Power for You. I'm your host, Brian Kasher. While the corporate media is generating profit covering the daily distractions, Truth to Power for You is about organizing for action. Each episode of Truth to Power for You offers interviews with successful organizer advocates, music, and arts for change. This episode opens with some words of wisdom from activist, actor, and movie producer Danny Glover, who shares his views on the need for every generation to define its own movements. We're then joined by one of America's leading progressive advocates, Joel Segal, who shares insight from his work on movements ranging from the Vietnam War, apartheid divestment, his working in Congress, and more. This episode's featured artist is Eleanor Goldfield. Eleanor is an author, musician, artist, progressive journalist, and accomplished business person operating through her Art Killing Apathy project, as well as her television program, Act Out. We then hear from Gabriel, one of our nation's youngest advocates for the elimination of homelessness. Hey, we have a limited number of Truth to Power for You patches. If you'd like to get a Truth to Power for You patch, comment on our Facebook feed about this program and we'll get you one of our limited edition Truth to Power for You sew-on patches. All right, for our first guest, in addition to approximately 119 major motion picture roles and 45 television roles, Danny Glover is also known around the world for his willingness to stand for peace, student rights, civil rights, living wages, and he's a vocal advocate for change in Nigeria, Brazil, Ecuador, the Caribbean, and Haiti. Danny sat down with us, even though he was being pulled away by two handlers. Here's Danny's words of wisdom he wanted to share with you.
This is important. Understand that there's generational shifts. That's how we collect information, how we receive information, the choices that we make. What we can't compare moments in time. The moment in time when I was born 72 years ago was a different moment in world history. It's a different way where there's a great deal of anticipation and anxiety around the possibilities of what the world can look like. The ideas. Who wrote the first article on socialism from the Monthly Review? Albert Einstein wrote the first article on which come. Who's the head of the anti-lynching campaign? And when I was born in 1946, Albert Einstein and Paul Robeson. Who know all of these are the forces that shaped that moment. We have to shape our own history at this own moment. Those leaders then, those men and women understood clearly that this was their moment. They knew future generations had to take that moment in history and change the world. Nelson Mandela knew that clearly. He knew when he received South Africa had his first election in 1994, that he knew that was a moment that was crystallized from the struggles before, but he knew that there were other struggles we have to overcome. It's ongoing, it's constant, but it has to be sustainable. Thank you so much.
How about that, folks? Danny's message is really a challenge, a call for you to grab the moment and move for change yourself. The fact is that the only people who will make change for the future today are the ones who grab the moment right now. Democracy is not a spectator sport. Okay, this episode's featured organizer has led several state, national, and international campaigns for change. Joel Segal is the executive director of the Climate Solution Coalition, the Justice Action Mobilization Network, is a founder of the Progressive Democrats of America, was a leader in the global AIDS movement, the South African apartheid divestment movement, and was the lead congressional staff author of the Affordable Care Act, often referred to as Obamacare. Joel has worked with Bono, Michael Moore, Quincy Jones, and more on the creative side of town, and as well as leading climate scientists on the leading edge of modern science today. Here's Joel. So Joel, I'm interested to learn what the first spark was that got you so involved in advocacy.
Well, first of all, Brian, I want to say I'm honored to be on your show. There are plenty of people that you could have on your show that you know, and I'm honored that you've asked me. And just want to tell you how much I also really like your family.
Thanks
your
for
wife
coming.
and your kids. Sure. Well, I participated in demonstrations against the Vietnam War. I was probably maybe 12 to 13 years old. I saw a lot of movies on the concentration camps, and I lost members of my family in the concentration camps. So I would say that growing up in a Southern Jewish community in the 60s and the 70s really formed who I am today, because it just seemed like everybody was political. Everybody was progressive. We were challenging authority. And that was probably, one of the reasons why I developed what I would call a social consciousness. But then my defining moment was I was in my second year of law school at UNC Chapel Hill. I was not a activist at all. In fact, I played basketball every day. I'm a professional bass guitar player, specializing in folk and jazz.
Sweet.
And classically trained, jazz trained. I had no interest in activism. And I went to a meeting on divestment from South Africa. And at the time, that was when...
Which was a huge movement, by the way. Divestment was a huge campaign across...
Well, you were one of the leaders of it.
Hey.
I remember you being one of the leaders of it. And I'll be honest with you, I felt very uncomfortable at the meeting. I didn't fit very well. I was a musician. I like to laugh and party and play basketball. So I decided to start my own organization at Chapel Hill, and it ended up being one of the largest divestment chapters in the country. And what I did was I would throw these big parties at different people's houses.
Yeah.
And I would actually perform and play music, and then we would march the next day.
Wow.
So I built fun and entertainment. I used to call it polytainment.
Great tactic. Great. Using the arts and entertainment to draw people in.
There was a very, very famous activist who worked in one of Charlotte's inner city neighborhoods where they had a really bad crack and drug trafficking problem. And his name was the Bear. And he told me something I'll never forget. He said, Joel, when people eat cornbread and they eat collard greens, it fills their stomach and they feel good. And when you're trying to negotiate, when people are feeling good in their stomach, then they feel good in their head.
Like it.
And I think I was about 30 to 31 years old at the time. I never forgot that. And in politics, you gotta come up with a solution.
Yeah.
That was a defining moment. I'd say the third moment was when Abby Hoffman, the great late Abby Hoffman, who I was very close to, who mentored me, because I was the founder of the Student Action Union, which was 60 universities under one umbrella.
Nice.
We were trying to replicate Students for Democratic Society. And Abby Hoffman challenged me to be the leader of the student movement when I was 26. And I said, I don't believe in leadership. I'm a Buddhist.
Oh.
And he used an explicative that started with the word F.
Oh.
He said, F your Buddhism. You're a Jew and you're a GD leader, and you got to take the bull by the horns and you got to lead.
Sounds like good advice to me.
Well,
it seems like maybe you followed it.
I did follow it, but I reluctantly followed it because as a bass player, you're always in the background, right?
Sure.
In high school and junior high, I played basketball and I was a point guard, and I always distributed. So the idea of leading wasn't something I was comfortable with. I was more in the background. But I took his advice, and I've never stopped leading. But the way you lead doesn't mean that you're the one on TV and radio and newspapers. Leading is about getting the objective and goals to make human progress and getting it done. It's not about yourself. It's about creating a movement.
That is such an important ethic for people who organize or who want to get other people involved. You've got to be willing to share the spotlight and encourage others to take it.
I'm Jewish and I study Buddhism.
Yeah.
And in the Buddhist tradition, you're not to have an ego. And it's hard not to do this work, by the way, and not have an ego, right?
Yeah.
But you have to have a healthy ego. And a healthy ego is when you reach to someone like yourself and say, look, thank you for asking me to speak at the press conference, but I want you to speak.
Right on.
We were at a meeting at Senator Tom Tillis's office. This was a MoveOn.org function, and they asked me, the group, would you please, do the press conference, because we were talking to him about some things about Trump and the ban on Muslims. And I said, well, I'm honored, but you know what? You organized this whole event. You brought out 300 people to Trump Tuesdays, and I didn't. I just spoke. And I'd rather you.
I saw you there with the group who were being interviewed by a number of different reporters.
Right.
But I also saw you standing back.
That's right.
And the other folks were allowed to come up and make their presentation, speak their heart, speak truth to power, so to speak. And that was, to me, that was a brilliant move as an organizer.
Well, that's because you're an organizer, Brian, so you understand. But I get a vicarious pleasure of lifting young people up, especially of color. And so my role now is more of, I'd say it's professorial, where I'm teaching people how to organize.
A mentor.
I'm mentoring. I'm teaching people how to lobby. I'm teaching people how to, work the press. Because I've been doing this for 26 years. And, I led the universal health care movement. I led the global AIDS movement. I led the Katrina movement. I've written over 20 bills in Congress. I worked with one of the most powerful members of Congress, John Conyers, for 13 years. I have stacks of news clippings. I mean, what more do I need to do? It's got to be about humanity and helping people and lifting people up who are voiceless, people who are oppressed, people who don't have housing, people who don't have food, healthcare. It's got to be about them. And if I was going to say what motivates me is I don't want to see people suffer. And most activists who really are serious activists, and I've met them all, I have. It doesn't matter, Aaron Brockovich, Quincy Jones, Michael Jackson, Abby Hoffman, John Conyers. I could go and say I've learned from the best, and they all had one thing in common. They were loving, they were warm, they mentored you, they took you under their arm. Congressman Walter Fauntleroy. What they all have in common is they were down to earth, humble, but they cared about making life better for people who were left out, who were the least of these and unheard. And that's what motivates me.
And on that point, let me ask you, having served, having been an organizer in the streets, having motivated people to get engaged, having worked your way up through numerous organizations at all these different levels into being a leading staffer in Congress, what kind of things have you seen that people have done, said, or do that influences members of Congress?
What I found is a mythology. People say it doesn't matter if you don't call a member of Congress's office. It's not true. You get 1 or 2 phone calls from a constituent, you stop what you're doing, and you sign them onto the bill that they asked you to sign on. If you get postcards, you take that seriously, because a member of Congress is influenced by 2 things: money. But here's the most important thing. Getting reelected, getting reelected, and getting reelected, and getting reelected. It's a good gig. 2 years, make $185,000. Your staff do most of the work. Staff do most of the work.
Sure.
And so it is not the case that every member is bought and sold. It's not true. In fact, a lot of the members of Congress were there because they really cared about public service. This idea, like, throw all the bums out, that's really what I call intellectual confusion and a mythology, because a lot of them are not bums, and a lot of them are people you do not want to throw out. In fact, a lot of them are the most dedicated people that I've ever met in my life. The biggest problem in the system is the raising of money. Members of Congress spend 50 to 60% of their time raising money. And I remember one member of Congress, who will remain nameless, said, "Joel, if I had known I had to sit here and raise money at the DCCC, I would have never ran for Congress." Unless we get the money out of politics, it won't change that much.
What kind of advice would you give to folks who are just starting out so that they too can blossom and make change in their own corner of the world?
Well, it's the single most important question that often is never asked. Martin Luther King, who was in, I think, his 20s, when he first started out as a preacher, they were asking the question, well, what are we going to do about segregation? That was the question they asked. So they started having meetings in their church about, it wasn't in Washington, D.C., it wasn't in New York City, it was in the South, in a very segregated city. And they said, well, why don't we do a bus boycott? Why don't we start marching? And it was really organized. If you look at the civil rights movement, it really started off with groups like SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Remember the sit-ins at Woolworths?
Absolutely.
What I recommend is you call your closest friends and you go have dinner or breakfast or lunch and you say, look, I got an idea that I want to share with you and I want to know what you think. But I'd like to start a coalition to end homelessness in the city of Charlotte, North Carolina.
A goal.
And then work backwards. In other words, you got to know exactly what's the end game. So here's A and here's Z. I start at Z and I go back to A. So Z is end homelessness in America, universal health care for everybody, Medicare for all, 100% clean renewable energy. Then you got to work backwards. Then once you get that small group, then you got to find other people who are like yourself, Brian, who are easy. I'd have to say that the best social movements that I've worked in, we created a beloved community.
Love that term, by the way.
A beloved community. And then there's a saying by Reverend Lennox Yearwood, if it's not fun, I'm done. And what I do is I keep it fun. I become friends with the activists. I get to know their children. We go to movies together. We go listen to music together. That's how Mandela started his movement with the African National Congress. They used to have parties.
Good
listen
example.
to jazz.
Good example.
And we become a little bit too corporatized with the nonprofit foundations.
Yep.
You feel like you're at a bank or something, and you don't start a movement that way. The way you start a movement is you got to create a family. So I brought the experiences of the Jewish community, which was very international, where you hugged and you kissed and you laughed and you ate food, and being a musician where you loved and you laughed and you ate food, and I brought that to activism.
You know that's great advice, Joel. I love what you're saying. Bring some culture to it. Bring some life. And let me split a hair here. A true protest is something, in my vision, that's spontaneous. People come from all walks of life. Thousands and thousands of people show up. And that's a little different than a movement. That's a protest against something. What you're talking about is building a movement, a cohesive group of people across all walks of life who are working towards the same end goal or goals, okay, loosely linked by whatever means, assembling, coming together to work together. So, when I hear people calling what we're doing protests, and I wanted to put this contrast on the table for you, because I love the word that you're using, movement. You're not talking about building up protests. You're not talking about working against. Everything I'm hearing is positive. You're working for something. You're working with people. You're making people feel good along the way.
Well, you can have a moment or you can have a movement.
There you go.
Okay. A moment, it's cathartic, it feels good. But if you can't pass or kill a bill, on the state legislature level, federal level, or local level, then you really, or change a law or a policy, your movement is a moment. So if you look at the great advances in human history, it was usually done by a grassroots movement that protested on the outside, did rallies, but they were lobbying on the inside.
That's so important.
You got to do both. But the other thing that I do consciously is I try to make sure that there are people of color that are in the leadership. That's very important. That's a lot of white progressive activists make a huge mistake of not diversifying their movement. There's a great bass player, Bootsy Collins.
Yeah.
He says,
love him.
He says, if you fake the funk, your nose will grow. He calls it the Pinocchio theory.
Okay.
If you fake your activism and your lack of sincerity, people will pick up on that.
All right.
And they won't help you when you need them. But that's why we're building a climate fusion movement.
Fusion. Thank you very much.
Fusion. In other words, you can't just care about the Earth's temperature and the polar bears, although I care about polar bears.
Right, sure.
What about people who don't have housing and jobs, or people in our inner cities who are hungry and don't have indoor plumbing? It's all the same. It's all about humanity and helping people who are getting their butt kicked.
We've got about a minute left. What are Joel's number 1, 2, 3 pieces of advice for those people coming on board, or maybe who've been at it for a little while?
You got to prepare. But the most important thing is you've got to have critical mass. And you can't just have white folk or only black folk. You need white, black, Latino, gay, straight, Asian, East Indian, whatever America is, You got to bring them all together. But the key is to make people feel like they're part of a family. They're being listened to. They're being respected. They're being heard.
Right
If
on.
you don't give people respect and listen to them and ask them questions like, what do you think we ought to do? I'd like to hear your perspective. That's very important as an organizer. Instead of saying what you want them to do, you pose the question.
Right on.
How do you think we should end homelessness from your point of view?
Mm-hmm.
And just get a legal pad and just ask. This is what Mr. Connors used to do. This is what King did too. So instead of giving all the answers, pose the question, listen to everybody, and what happens is you'll start hearing a consensus. Then you go, well, based on what everyone's saying, I think what we want to do is get 30,000 units of affordable solar-powered housing. Then you go and find a member of the city council and the county commission or the mayor, and you get them to introduce the bill.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, sure.
You go to your philanthropist, you go to your member of Congress for funding, but it has to be part of a larger campaign. You got to have a strategy. This is serious business, man. And politics is a contact sport. You're going to get punched when you try to unify people. I got battle scars to prove it. 30 years of battles. You are going to get you as
part of the turf. Absolutely.
You got to be ready for that. But if you have other people around you, they'll lift you up. But you got to expect that there will people. They will come after you. But you have to just like say, okay, this is part of the deal, and then go watch a basketball game.
Well, hey, on that note, thanks for
you
coming
for the
by.
interview,
Thanks
man.
for all you do.
Thank you. Thanks for all that you
Love
do.
and blessings to you and yours.
Peace and love to you.
know? Joel has been in the thick and thin of it, folks. Organizing students, the homeless, musicians, global scientists. He's written some of the most progressive legislation passed by our modern Congress. And yes, you can even find Joel working on local school issues around children's health. Joel's message of having an open heart, being serious and yet having fun is as real as it gets, folks. It's as real as it gets. You know, there is a role for everyone who wants to make change, and everything you do matters whether you see it or not. Your actions affect eternity. Volunteering, attending meetings, handing out water at a rally, making a donation, getting a friend involved, hosting a movie night, all can make a difference in our collective goal of changing the world for the better and changing it for the better for all. Next up is one of the organizing field's creative activists, Eleanor Goldfield. You can find Eleanor singing with her band Rooftop Revolutionaries, doing progressive journalism on her television program Act Out, or on any of a number of projects through her Art Killing Apathy project. Eleanor is also an author and a successful businesswoman. We caught up with Eleanor at an intimate performance of spoken word pieces from her book, Paradigm Lost. Check it out.
Call me an anarchist, socialist, commie, leftist, because you don't know the difference. But all those words sound scary. And when you call me un-American, what you're really saying is that I'm anti-war, not brainwashed or whitewashed. This is what I stand for. Outside of party lines, repeat offender of thought crimes, humanity over oligarchy, fist up if you follow me. Not like sheeple, but people. Think for yourselves, rise up and rebel. Take to the streets and meet me at the corner of freedom and justice. In this fight, it's just us. Ain't no savior or prayer that can lift us up. So drag your gods from their man-made thrones, throw them out of the clouds onto the ground, and watch how they quake in the wake of reality. Like a flickering TV, weaker as you, the creator, grows stronger. Unplug and stand up. Switch homicide for deicide. Drop your idols. Grab hold of humanity. Rise. Let apathy fall by the wayside. You don't need it, that drug. Don't let it define you. Not one more line of God's will, shrugs and brain spills. Rebel, because you know it's the only way that this will get better. Fuck keep calm. We're yelling, propelling forward, putting people over profit, planet and peace, over putrid holes filled with cheap plastic, bombastic nationalistic shows of a hollow pride. Yes, we need outcries at least, trials for war crimes instead of libraries named for trigger-happy fools, illiterate tools who couldn't spell their way out of elementary school, where children left behind seek Heil to monopoly men on high, learn how to stay in line and count time based on 8-hour workdays, 365. And yet as we toil, our minds shrink and spoil, well below average, like Forrest Gump, just a hunch. But maybe those trillions we spend on bombing and drilling could go into filling our kids with knowledge. But that's American exceptionalism. Number one at war, we're good at killing people. Number fuck science and math and everything else. Excelling at failing, freedom derailing. Think closing your eyes will keep us from crashing? As we roll, just rehashing all the mistakes that dug us this grave. Am I fucking insane to think blood mixed with oil will stain our future, our name, our hearts, and our brains? That the poison born of Agent Orange shouldn't be sprayed on our food? We stack alms at the steeple while people just outside starve in the corners they carved from a precious foundation founded on hope and change, crumbling, stumbling. These facades can't save us for long. So, ain't it strange that patriots are named for every war waged, these freedom crusades that make us less safe, less free, and less brave, and we, those for peace and a life without chains, are un-American. Me, socialist scum and a feminist cunt, destroyer of American dreams.
Eleanor's book, Paradigm Lost, features many of her written pieces and offers guidance on how you too can perform spoken word. We are posting a few more of Eleanor's spoken word numbers in the form of a spoken word EP on the Truth2Power4U Facebook and YouTube feeds. Check them out. It's good stuff. All right. Our last speaker for this episode is our youngest to date, Sean Gabriel. Sean can often be seen talking it up at community events, advocating for the elimination of homelessness. Here's Sean.
When I get old, then I know for a fact that I am going to do something that will help the entire world, because I don't want the world to just think that I'm just trying to do this so I can be on TV. I'm doing this because I know what it feels like, and I don't want anyone else to ever have to go through this again.
Sean is dedicated to making change in the world with his life. What about you? You know, there is something you can do to help in our global pursuit for change. It doesn't have to be of international importance. For instance, Joel's worked on international issues, but he's still out there advocating for local community children as well. It can be as simple as giving a homeless family some food, clothing, or a blanket, or taking some water to a rally to share with people. Or how about writing some poetry or a song, or doing a painting about the human condition? Everyone has a role to play, and no role is too small to matter. But you know, the thing is, you have to get out there. In closing, here's Annie Dechant reminding us that even when people think something's just flat out impossible, like flight or blacks sitting in the front of a bus, yes, it can happen. Here's Annie singing her inspirational Out There.
People thought they were off their rockers. They'd never get that airplane off the ground. Till one morning out in Kitty Hawk in that Carolina sky, she flew 12 seconds before she came back down. Then people thought the sky was the limit, that going to the moon could not be done. But when the Eagle landed, that brave space cowboy took one small step and proved everybody wrong. Out there, dancing on a wire, out there, running through the fire. They ain't afraid to fall. They live to risk it all. If you're gonna do a lot, then you gotta be a little out there. A seamstress from Montgomery, Alabama, stayed seated on a bus and took a stand. That brazen little move caused a revolution. She broke every boundary when she wouldn't budge an inch. So if you think that you won't make a difference, that what you're trying to prove is too bizarre, remember it's the dreamers, the do-or-die believers that march right into history just being who they are. Out there dancing on a wire, out there running through the fire. They ain't afraid to fall. They live to risk it all. If you're gonna do a lot, then you gotta be a little out there. Busting down the fences, out there, damn the consequences. Let's live to risk it all, and don't be afraid to fall. If we're gonna do a lot, then we gotta be a little out there. People thought they were off their rocker.
Nice.
Thank you.